Rain hammered against the windows of the research station like 1,000 tiny fists. Dr. David Wells looked up from his microscope, frowning at the storm raging across the purple-tinted landscape of Tau Ceti VII. 3 months alone on this rock, studying moss samples that all looked the same, and now the weather decided to throw a fit. He stretched, his back popping after hours hunched over samples. The station felt too quiet despite the storm. David missed voices, laughter, even arguments. Anything but the endless hum of air recyclers and his own breathing. A scratching noise cut through the storm's roar. David froze. The sound came again, deliberate and rhythmic against the outer airlock door. His heart picked up speed. The local wildlife avoided the station. The few creatures native to this planet were small, timid things that fled from anything human-made. He pulled up the external camera feed on his tablet. At first he saw nothing but rain and wind-blown debris, then something moved near the door base. Small, huddled, definitely not local fauna. David zoomed in, his breath caught. A dragon, an actual dragon, though barely bigger than a house cat. Its scales were dull gray-blue, lacking the vibrant sheen he had seen in database images. One wing hung at an awkward angle, the membrane torn and bloody. The creature's sides heaved with labored breathing. It looked up at the camera as if sensing his gaze. Even through the grainy feed, David saw intelligence in those eyes, ancient, aware, pleading. His training screamed caution, unknown xenobiological specimen, potential danger. Protocol demanded he contact the authorities first, but Protocol had not seen those eyes. David grabbed the medical kit from the supply locker and headed for the airlock. His hands shook as he worked the controls. This was stupid. This was dangerous. This was probably going to get him fired. He opened the outer door. The dragon collapsed inward with the rush of pressurizing air. David caught it before it hit the floor, surprised by how light it felt. Fragile. The creature's scales were cool to the touch, too cool. Its breathing came in shallow gasps. "Easy," David murmured, carrying it inside. "I've got you." He set the dragon on his workbench, clearing sample trays with his elbow. The creature's eyes flickered open, pupils dilating in fear. It tried to scramble away but lacked the strength. "SHH, I'm not going to hurt you," David said, keeping his voice soft. He had no idea if it understood, but tone mattered with frightened animals. "Let me help." He assessed the injuries with practiced efficiency. The torn wing was the worst, but not life-threatening if treated quickly. Multiple abrasions covered the dragon's body, signs of malnutrition, dehydration. Whatever had happened to this creature, it had been suffering for days. David worked quickly, cleaning wounds with antiseptic. The dragon flinched but did not fight. It watched him with those impossibly old eyes, as if measuring his intentions. "Good," David said, applying synthetic skin to the wing tier. "You're being very brave." He offered water in a shallow dish. The dragon sniffed it suspiciously before lapping at it with a forked tongue. After a moment, it drank greedily. "Not too fast," David warned, pulling the dish back. "You'll make yourself sick." The dragon made a sound between a chirp and a whine, frustrated but understanding. David smiled despite himself. He pulled up the station's xenobiology database, searching for information on dragon species. The results made his stomach sink. Draconis stellaris, endangered, protected under 3 different galactic treaties, and according to every source he found, this species did not naturally occur anywhere near Tau Ceti VII. The nearest confirmed population was 12 light-years away. Which meant this baby had not wandered here. Someone had brought it. And judging by its condition, someone had not cared much about keeping it alive. David read further. Dragon hatchlings required specific nutrients, high protein, certain minerals. He checked his ration supplies and cobbled together something that might work, nutrient paste mixed with dried meat and vitamin supplements. The dragon sniffed the mixture and devoured it in seconds. "Guess that works," David said. He fashioned a bed from thermal blankets in the corner of his lab. The dragon wobbled over to it, circled twice, and collapsed. Within seconds, its breathing had deepened into sleep. David sat at his desk and stared at the sleeping creature. He should report this, had to report this. Dragon trafficking was serious business. The authorities needed to know. But something stopped him from reaching for the comm panel. Maybe it was the way the dragon had looked at him, trusting despite obvious terror. Maybe it was the loneliness he had been drowning in for months. Maybe it was just the simple human instinct to protect something small and hurt. He would call tomorrow. Tonight, he would make sure the creature survived. David returned to his microscope, trying to focus on his work. His eyes kept drifting to the corner where the dragon slept. As he watched, the dull scales began to glow faintly, a soft blue-green light that pulsed in rhythm with the creature's breathing. He had read about that. Dragons glowed in response to emotional states. But the databases said it only happened around other dragons, family bonds triggering the bioluminescence. David looked down at his hands, still stained with the dragon's blood from treating its wounds. He thought about the choice he had made, opening that door despite every rational reason not to. The storm outside began to fade. Inside, something new was beginning. Something that would change everything. 3 days had passed since the dragon arrived, and David's carefully ordered life had transformed into beautiful chaos. The creature he had started calling Flint, after the gray-blue color of its scales, had recovered enough to explore. Currently, Flint perched on top of the food synthesizer, head tilted as he watched David prepare breakfast. "You already ate," David said, not looking up from his protein bar. "Don't give me those eyes." Flint chirped, a sound David had learned meant either hunger or boredom, possibly both. The dragon leaped from the synthesizer to the counter, landing with surprising grace considering the damaged wing. David had wrapped it in a flexible brace, and Flint seemed to understand not to strain it, another sign of intelligence that kept surprising him. David tore off a piece of his protein bar and offered it. Flint snatched it delicately, making a pleased rumbling sound deep in his throat. "You're spoiling me into bad habits," David muttered, but he could not help smiling. He had meant to call the authorities that first night, then the next morning, then surely by the third day. But each time he reached for the comm panel, Flint would do something that made him pause, learn a new word, figure out how to open cabinet doors, rest his small head against David's arm while he worked. The truth David refused to admit was simple. He did not want to be alone anymore. "All right, let's try this again," David said, sitting cross-legged on the floor. Flint scrambled down to join him, tail swishing with interest. "Water." He pointed to the dish. "Water," Flint repeated, the syllables rough but recognizable. David's heart jumped. Every day, Flint's vocalizations grew more complex. The station AI had confirmed what David suspected. Dragons were telepathic within their own species, but could learn spoken language when bonded to other beings. Flint was actively trying to communicate. "Yes, exactly, water," David laughed. "You're brilliant, you know that." Flint's scales brightened, glowing with pleasure. David had learned to read the color shifts. Bright meant happy, dull meant tired or sad, dark meant scared or angry. Right now, Flint practically shimmered. The dragon headbutted David's hand gently, demanding attention. David scratched under Flint's chin, and the rumbling purr grew louder. "I should really call someone about you," David said quietly. "You know that, right? I'm breaking about 6 different regulations by keeping you here." Flint looked up at him with those ancient eyes and made a soft, questioning sound. David sighed. "Yeah, I know, I don't want to either." He pulled up his research files on the main terminal. Over the past days, between caring for Flint, he had dug deep into dragon history. What he found both fascinated and disturbed him. Dragons were one of the oldest known sentient species. They had existed before most galactic civilizations, living in harmony with dozens of races, but their power made them targets. Their eggs were valuable. Their scales could be sold. Their loyalty could be exploited. Wars had been fought over dragons. Entire trafficking networks existed to capture and sell them. And despite galactic laws, enforcement was weak in frontier regions like this one. Flint's parents were likely dead. The database search David ran had found reports of a dragon pair killed by poachers 3 months ago, their nest raided. 4 eggs stolen. DNA analysis suggested Flint was one of those eggs. Which meant Flint had hatched alone, probably in the cargo hold of a smuggler ship. Had escaped or been dumped when he proved too much trouble. Had wandered this hostile planet until finding David's door. The thought made David's chest tight with anger. "They hurt you," he said, watching Flint chase a stylus across the floor. "Those people who took you from your family, they hurt you and threw you." "Away." Flint stopped playing. He looked at David and made a sad, keening sound. David gathered the small dragon into his arms. Flint curled against his chest, scales dimming to deep blue. "I won't let anyone hurt you again," David promised. "I don't care what the rules say, you're safe here." The words felt like a vow, something fundamental shifting in David's understanding of himself. He had always followed regulations, trusted the system, believed in proper channels. But looking at this small, damaged creature who trusted him completely, David realized some things mattered more than rules. Proximity alerts blared from the terminal. David's blood went cold. A ship was approaching the station. He pulled up the scanner feed, hoping for a supply run or research vessel. What he saw made his stomach drop. The ship's signature matched known smuggler patterns, and it was heading directly for his station. "No," David whispered. Flint sensed his fear immediately. The dragon's scales went nearly black, and he pressed closer to David, trembling. David's mind raced. They were coming for Flint, had to be. Maybe they had tracking devices in the eggs. Maybe they had been searching this sector. Either way, they knew. He looked at Flint, at this small creature who had learned to trust him, who was trying so hard to communicate, who glowed with happiness when David praised him. The dragon who had given him purpose when he had been drowning in isolation. The ship would dock in less than 10 minutes. David made his choice. "Come on," he said, standing quickly. "We need to hide you." Flint chirped nervously but followed as David hurried to the specimen storage vault. It was climate-controlled, secure, and most importantly, shielded from most scanning equipment. "I need you to stay here," David said, setting Flint inside. "Don't make a sound no matter what you hear. I'll come back for you, I promise." Flint's eyes went wide with fear. He grabbed David's sleeve with one small claw, making a desperate sound. "I know," David said, his throat tight. "I know you're scared, but I won't let them take you. Trust me." For a long moment, Flint stared at him. Then, slowly, the dragon released his sleeve and curled up in the corner of the vault. David sealed the door and ran to erase all evidence of Flint's presence. He had maybe 5 minutes. Outside, the smuggler ship began its landing sequence. Everything was about to change. David wiped the last traces of dragon scales from his workbench as the airlock hissed open. His hands were steady despite the fear flooding his veins. Years of lab work had taught him to stay calm under pressure. He would need every bit of that training now. 4 figures entered the station. The leader was a Kralix, reptilian and massive, with scarred green scales and cold yellow eyes. David recognized the species from security briefings. Kralix made excellent mercenaries and terrible enemies. "Greetings," David said, forcing his voice to stay level. "This is a research station. We don't usually get visitors." The Kralix smiled, showing too many teeth. "Emergency landing. Engine trouble. You will provide shelter while we make repairs." It was not a request. "Of course," David said. He gestured to the common area. "You're welcome to wait there. I'll need to keep the lab sealed. Sensitive samples." The Kralix's eyes narrowed. "I am Vord. This is my crew." He indicated the 3 others, a mix of species David did not recognize. All carried weapons openly. "We will need to inspect the station for safety." David's heart pounded. "That's not necessary, I assure you." It was not a request, Vord repeated. David watched helplessly as the crew spread through his station, opening cabinets and scanning with handheld devices. They were searching for something specific, someone specific. Vord moved closer to David, studying him with predator's eyes. You are alone here. Yes, I'm a xenobiologist, cataloging native plant life. Boring work. Very, David agreed, but someone has to do it. Vord picked up a data pad from David's desk, scrolling through files. David's mind raced. He had cleared recent logs, but what if he missed something? One image, one note, one piece of evidence. Have you encountered anything unusual in your research? Vord asked casually. Strange creatures, unexpected findings. David's mouth went dry. Just moss and lichen, like I said, boring. One of the crew members called out in a guttural language. Vord's head snapped up and he crossed the room in 3 long strides. The crew member held something small and iridescent. A scale, Flint's scale. David's blood turned to ice. Vord examined the scale, then turned slowly to face David. All pretense of civility dropped from his expression. You are hiding something that belongs to me. I don't know what you're talking about. Do not lie, Vord snarled. We tracked the hatchling to this sector. It is here. You will return it immediately. David straightened his spine. Even if I knew what you were talking about, which I don't, dragons are protected under galactic law. You can't own one. Vord laughed a harsh sound. Law out here? He gestured at the empty landscape beyond the windows. There is no law in frontier space. There is only power, and I have it. He pulled a weapon from his belt, a plasma pistol that hummed with lethal energy. Last chance, human. Give me the dragon or I will tear this station apart, and you with it. David's mind went blank with terror for a moment. Then, cutting through the fear, came a single thought. Flint trusted him. That small, broken creature had looked at him with ancient eyes and chosen to trust. David would not betray that. No, he said quietly. Vord's eyes widened slightly, as if he could not believe what he heard. What? I said no. David's voice grew stronger. You want to search my station? Fine, but you won't find anything, and threatening me won't change that. For a moment, Vord seemed almost impressed. Then his expression hardened. Search everything, he ordered his crew. Storage, supplies, even the waste recyclers. The dragon is here. David watched them work, his mind racing. The specimen vault would not hold against a determined search. They would find Flint eventually. He needed help, needed backup, needed. The emergency beacon. In his office, hardwired into the station's power core. If he could reach it, send a distress call to the Galactic Authority. I need to check my equipment, David said, moving toward his office. The storm might have damaged the sensors. One of the crew members blocked his path. Vord shook his head. You stay where I can see you. David's last hope died. Without the beacon, no one would know they were in trouble. The nearest authority patrol was days away, even if someone noticed the station had gone silent. The crew was getting closer to the specimen vault. David could hear them working through the storage areas. Minutes, maybe. Then they would find Flint. He could not let that happen. David grabbed a safety flare from the emergency kit on the wall. It was not much of a weapon, but it was something. The crew member nearest him raised his gun, but David was already moving. He fired the flare directly at the alien's face. The brilliant red light exploded in the enclosed space. The alien screamed, clutching his eyes. David ran for his office, slapping the door controls as he passed. The door sealed, buying him precious seconds. He activated the emergency beacon, fingers flying across the controls. Distress signal. His location, smugglers, dragon trafficking, send help. He included every piece of evidence he had gathered, every scan of Vord's ship, everything. The office door exploded inward. Vord stood in the smoking doorway, his weapon raised and his expression murderous. You just killed yourself, Vord said coldly. David's hand hovered over one final control. The mining charges he used for geological samples, stored in the supply room. If he overloaded them remotely, the explosion would. Flint's terrified cry echoed through the station intercom. They had found the vault. David made his choice. He triggered the detonation sequence, grabbed the emergency supply pack, and ran toward Flint's location. Behind him, Vord shouted orders to his crew. The hunt was on, and David had just declared war. He just hoped he would live long enough to regret it. David reached the specimen vault just as one of the smugglers wrenched the door open. Flint was backed into the corner, scales black with terror, hissing and snapping at the towering alien. "Get away from him," David shouted. He fired his second flare gun directly at the smuggler. The alien stumbled backward, and David dove into the vault, scooping Flint into his arms. The dragon latched onto his chest, claws digging through his shirt, making desperate, frightened sounds. "I've got you," David gasped. "I've got you." He ran into the maintenance tunnels, areas of the station most people ignored. Narrow passages designed for repair work, not combat, but David knew every centimeter of this station. He had spent months crawling through these tunnels fixing broken systems. Behind him, boots thundered on metal floors. Vord's voice echoed through the corridors, barking orders in multiple languages. David's lungs burned as he ran. Flint clung to him, silent now, understanding somehow that noise would give them away. The dragon's small body trembled against David's chest. At the first junction, David pulled a mining charge from his pack. His hands shook as he set the timer. 30 seconds, he wedged it between pipes and kept running. The explosion shook the tunnel. Shouts of pain and surprise echoed behind them. David felt sick. He had just hurt someone, maybe killed them. But Flint's claws dug a little deeper into his shirt, and David pushed the guilt away. Protect first. Feel later. He emerged into the communications hub, the most secure room in the station. Reinforced walls, independent power, multiple escape routes if needed. David sealed the door behind them and set Flint down gently. "Are you hurt?" he asked, checking the dragon over. The wing brace had come loose. Several scales were scraped, but Flint seemed otherwise unharmed. Flint looked up at him and said clearly, "David's scared." David's breath caught. Those were not random sounds. Flint had spoken actual words expressing concern for him. "Yeah," David said, his voice rough. "David is very scared, but David won't let them hurt Flint." Flint pressed against his legs, scales flickering between dark fear and lighter trust. The dragon believed him, completely, absolutely. David heard cutting tools starting up outside the sealed door. They would breach it eventually. He checked his supplies. One mining charge left. No weapons, limited food and water. The emergency beacon was active, but help was at least a day away. They were trapped. "I'm sorry," David said to Flint. "I should have called for help sooner, should have done this properly. Now we're both going to—" Flint headbutted his hand sharply. "No," the dragon said firmly. David Good protected Flint. Tears stung David's eyes. Here was this small creature, barely recovered from its own trauma, trying to comfort him, trying to show gratitude even as danger closed in around them. "You deserve better than this," David said. "You deserve a family, a real home, not dying in a research station with a failed scientist who couldn't even keep you safe." Flint climbed into David's lap, something he had not done since that first night. The dragon settled there, scales brightening slightly. "David is home," Flint said. "David is family." The words hit David like a physical blow. In his research, he had read about dragon bonds, how they formed rarely but absolutely, how dragons chose their families not by blood but by action and heart, how once bonded, dragons would defend their chosen ones to the death. Flint had chosen him. This ancient, magical creature had looked at a lonely human and decided he was worth dying for. "No," David said firmly. "No, you don't get to die for me. I'm the adult here. I'm supposed to protect you." Flint tilted his head, confused by the human concept of age meaning responsibility. The cutting sounds grew louder. They were almost through. David positioned himself between Flint and the door. He held his last mining charge ready, If they breached, he would detonate it. Maybe buy Flint a few more seconds to hide. It was not much of a plan, but it was all he had. "I want you to know," David said, not looking at Flint because he might lose his courage if he did, "that finding you was the best thing that ever happened to me. These past few days, having you here, teaching you words and watching you explore, it made me remember why I loved science, why I came out here in the first place." Flint made a soft, questioning sound. "I was running," David admitted, "from expectations, from a life that felt too small. I thought being alone would fix me, but it just made the emptiness worse." He laughed bitterly. "Then you showed up, and suddenly I wasn't empty anymore." The door began to buckle, almost through. Flint stood, moving to David's side despite David's attempt to shield him. The dragon's scales started to glow, brighter than David had ever seen. Energy crackled around Flint's small form. "Flint, what are you?" The door exploded inward. Vord and 2 crew members rushed through, weapons raised. David threw himself in front of Flint, arms spread wide. "No," he shouted. Flint released a wave of pure force. David had read about this in his research. Dragon abilities manifesting under extreme stress. Telekinesis, energy manipulation, powers that should not appear until adolescence. But love and terror could wake things early. The smugglers flew backward like toys, slamming into the corridor walls. Vord's weapon skittered across the floor. The Krallics struggled to rise, stunned. Flint collapsed, the glow fading from his scales. The effort had drained him completely. David grabbed his last mining charge and ran to the doorway. He threw it into the corridor and hit the detonator. The ceiling collapsed, burying the corridor in rubble, sealing them in. Also sealing them in. David picked up Flint's unconscious form and held him close. The air recyclers in this room would last maybe 6 hours with the door sealed. Then the oxygen would run out. He sat against the wall, cradling the dragon, and waited for rescue that might never come. Time lost meaning in the sealed communications hub. David drifted between consciousness and dreams, the air growing steadily thinner. Flint lay curled in his arms, breathing shallow but steady. The dragon woke occasionally, making soft, worried sounds before exhaustion dragged him under again. David's thoughts wandered. He remembered his sister's wedding, how he had left early because crowds made him anxious. His father asking why he could not just be normal. The university advisor who said David was brilliant but lacked passion. All the small moments that had convinced him he was better off alone. How wrong he had been. Flint stirred, looking up at David with glowing eyes. The dragon pressed his small head against David's chest over his heart. "David," Flint whispered, just his name, but it carried weight, meaning, love. "Yeah, buddy," David managed. "I'm here." Somewhere beyond the rubble, he heard scraping sounds. The smugglers digging through, or maybe hallucination, hard to tell anymore. Then a different sound, sharper, more organized, cutting tools but efficient ones, professional. The debris shifted, voices called out in standard Galactic common. "Survivors, identify yourself." David tried to answer, but his voice came out as a croak. Flint lifted his head and released a clear, ringing cry. A dragon's call for help, echoing through the wreckage. "Dragon's signature confirmed," someone shouted. "Move, move." The rubble cleared away rapidly. Lights flooded the dark space. David squinted against the brightness as figures in Galactic Authority uniforms poured in. A human man in a captain's uniform knelt beside David. "I'm Captain Harris. Can you move?" David shook his head. Everything felt distant and strange. Harris made quick gestures and medics rushed forward. They tried to take Flint, but the dragon hissed and clung to David fiercely. "It's okay," David slurred. "He's scared, just let him stay." Harris nodded to the medics. They loaded both David and Flint onto a stretcher together, the dragon refusing to leave his side. As they carried them toward the medical ship, David saw Vord and his crew in restraints, their weapons confiscated. Vord's yellow eyes locked onto David. Rage, hatred, promises of revenge. David was too tired to care. He woke. In a medical bay, clean white walls and the soft hum of advanced equipment. For a moment, panic seized him. Where was Flint? Then he felt the weight on his chest. Flint slept curled there, looking tiny and vulnerable. Someone had treated the dragon's injuries properly, replaced the makeshift wing brace with a real medical one. Flint's scales glowed softly with healthy color. David's throat tightened with relief. He rested his hand gently on Flint's back. Awake then. Captain Harris sat in a chair beside the bed, reading something on a data pad. He set it aside and smiled. You gave us quite a scare. Another hour and we would have been recovering bodies, not survivors. The beacon, David said, his voice rough, did it. Worked perfectly. We were already on patrol in the next sector, came as fast as we could. Harris leaned forward. Your evidence package was thorough, very thorough. Ship registries, trafficking routes, DNA analysis. You built a solid case while under siege. David managed a weak smile. Professional habits. Those professional habits just helped us dismantle the largest dragon trafficking ring in 3 sectors. Vord was wanted for crimes across a dozen systems. Harris paused. You could have died. Why risk it for one hatchling? David looked at Flint. Would you have left him? Harris was quiet for a moment. No, I suppose I wouldn't have. Over the next 2 days, David recovered while Flint rarely left his side. The dragon was subdued, clearly traumatized by the events. But he ate when David encouraged him and practiced words when David asked, healing together. Harris visited often, bringing updates. The smugglers were in custody awaiting trial. The investigation had expanded based on David's evidence. Multiple arrests across the sector. On the 3rd day, Harris brought difficult news. We've been searching for Flint's family, his birth family, I mean. David's heart sank. He had known this moment would come, but knowing did not make it easier. His parents were killed 3 months ago by poachers, Harris continued gently. 4 eggs were taken from the nest. Flint is the only survivor we've found. Flint's scales darkened. The dragon understood more than they realized. There's a dragon sanctuary 6 months' travel from here, Harris said. They could take him, raise him with others of his kind, teach him dragon culture and traditions. That's good, David said, the words tasting like ash. That's what he deserves. Harris studied him carefully. There's another option. Dragon bonding is recognized under Galactic law. If a bond has formed, separation can harm both parties. You could keep him. David stared. I'm just a researcher. I don't know anything about raising a dragon. You know about protecting him, Harris said. About putting his needs first, about being willing to die for him. He glanced at Flint, who was watching them intently. That dragon used abilities far too advanced for his age. You know what triggers early manifestation. Emotional bonds, David whispered. Extreme need to protect someone they've bonded with. Exactly. Flint didn't just see you as a convenient shelter, Dr. Wells. He bonded with you, chose you as family. Harris stood. The choice is legally yours, but you should know what you're choosing. Dragons live centuries. This is a lifetime commitment. After Harris left, David sat with Flint for a long time. The dragon had climbed into his lap, scales flickering uncertain colors. I don't want to trap you, David said quietly. If you'd be happier with other dragons, learning about your heritage, I understand. I want what's best for you. Flint looked up at him with those ancient eyes. David is best, the dragon said clearly. David is home, David is family. David's vision blurred with tears. You're sure, really sure, because once I say yes, I won't let you go, not ever. Flint's scales blazed bright with happiness. Yes, stay with David always. David held his dragon close and made his choice. 14 months after a lost dragon knocked on his door, David stood on the observation deck of the Frontier Integration Center and watched Flint practice flying. The dragon was enormous now, the size of a small aircraft, his scales gleaming blue-green in the alien sun. He swooped and dove with pure joy, his torn wing fully healed and stronger than before. Other researchers watched in amazement as Flint performed aerial maneuvers that seemed impossible for his age. "He's showing off," David said, unable to hide his smile. Dr. Rodriguez, the center's director, laughed. "Can you blame him? He knows we're watching." Flint spotted David through the observation window and changed direction mid-flight, landing on the exterior platform with surprising delicacy for something his size. He pressed his massive head against the window, and David placed his hand on the glass. Flint's scales glowed warm. "The bond between you two still fascinates our entire research division," Rodriguez said. "We've documented cross-species bonding before, but never one this deep. You can sense his emotions." "Sometimes," David admitted. "When they're strong, happiness, fear, hunger, definitely hunger." That earned another laugh. "He's learning faster than dragons raised in traditional groups. The comparison studies show remarkable results." "Because he wants to make you proud," Rodriguez said. "Motivation is powerful." David thought about the dragon who had arrived broken and terrified at his door, who had trusted him despite every reason not to, who had chosen him as family when David had felt utterly alone. "The feeling is mutual," David said quietly. His communicator chirped. Captain Harris's face appeared on the screen. "Dr. Wells, we have a situation." David's stomach tightened. Harris only called when it was serious. "Another trafficking ring?" David asked. "Worse, we've located a smuggler ship with cargo holds full of dragon eggs, at least 20, but the ship is in neutral space and our authority to act is limited." Harris paused. "We need your help, both of you." David glanced at Flint, who was still watching through the window. The dragon sensed his mood shift immediately, scales darkening with concern. "What do you need us to do?" 2 days later, David and Flint approached the smuggler vessel in a small authority shuttle. The plan was simple. Flint would use his abilities to disable the ship's weapons, while David's scientific expertise identified the eggs and proper storage conditions. A full authority team waited nearby, ready to move in once the ship was secure. Simple, but nothing was ever truly simple. "You ready?" David asked as they drew closer to the smuggler ship. Flint rumbled deep in his chest. "Protect the little ones," he said. His vocabulary had grown extensive. He spoke in full sentences now, his voice deeper but still carrying traces of that first chirping hatchling. "That's right," David said, "just like someone protected you." Flint turned his massive head to look at David directly. David protected Flint. Now Flint protects others. This is the way. David felt his chest swell with pride. This was what their bond had become, not just mutual survival, but shared purpose. Together they could help others like Flint, dragons who had been stolen and hurt and abandoned. The operation went smoothly at first. Flint's telekinetic abilities had grown formidable, and he disabled the ship's weapons systems before the smugglers even knew they were under attack. The authority team boarded while David located the cargo hold. 23 eggs, each one precious and irreplaceable, each one representing a dragon stolen from family. David carefully monitored the temperature and atmospheric controls while authority officers arrested the smugglers. These eggs would go to the dragon sanctuary, where they could hatch safely among their own kind. But one egg was different, smaller. Its shell was cracked and the bio-readings were weak. "This one won't survive transport," David said urgently. "It's too damaged, it needs help now." Captain Harris looked grim. "We're 3 days from the sanctuary. If you're right, it won't last that long." David made a decision. "I'll take it. Flint and I will care for it until it's stable enough to travel." Back at the integration center, David set up a medical incubation chamber while Flint watched anxiously. The small egg rested under heat lamps, its shell held together with medical adhesive. "Will it live?" Flint asked. "I don't know," David admitted, "but we'll try just like I tried with you." For 3 days, they maintained constant vigil. David monitored vitals while Flint used his abilities to gently strengthen the egg's life force, a technique adult dragons used to help sick hatchlings. A technique Flint had learned from instinct and desperation to save this small life. On the fourth day, the egg hatched. The hatchling was tiny, even smaller than Flint had been. Its scales were pale gold, and it made weak mewing sounds. David carefully cleaned and fed it while Flint watched with protective intensity. "What will happen to this one?" Flint asked. "The sanctuary will send someone to collect it once it's strong enough," David said. "They'll raise it with the others, give it a good life." Flint was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Like my life." David looked at his dragon, this magnificent creature who had grown from a terrified hatchling into someone who used his trauma to help others. "Yes," he said, "exactly like your life." 6 months later, David received a message from the dragon sanctuary. The golden hatchling, now called Ember by its caregivers, was thriving. It was learning to fly, to use its voice, to trust. The sanctuary director included a note saying Ember asked about the human and dragon who saved it, asked when it could visit to say thank you. David showed the message to Flint, who had grown even larger but still curled protectively around David when they rested. "We made a difference," David said. "We make family," Flint corrected. "Everyone deserves family. Everyone deserves someone who answers the door." David thought back to that stormy night when a small, scratching sound had changed everything. When he had chosen compassion over caution, connection over isolation. "You're right," he said, scratching under Flint's chin the way he still loved. "Everyone deserves someone who answers the door." Outside, the first stars were appearing in the alien sky. Somewhere, dragons flew free who might have died in cargo holds. Somewhere, eggs were safe who might have been sold. And here in this small room, a human and dragon rested together. Family by choice and by love. Flint's scales glowed softly in the darkness, and David fell asleep with one hand resting on his dragon's side, feeling the steady rhythm of breath that matched his own. Tomorrow would bring new missions, new dragons to save, new families to help form. But tonight was theirs, this quiet moment of peace earned through courage and compassion. A lost baby dragon had knocked on a door. A human had answered. And everything changed.